As we go into the last section of our supply and demand lesson, I wanted to share this quote because I think it's kind of funny and it relates to what we're talking about right now. Talk is cheap because supply exceeds demand. And my friends, this is totally true. A lot of us talk a little bit, myself included, a little bit too much. So it's cheap because our supply and the amount that we're supplying as people exceeds what other people want to hear, right? It's kind of a fun little way to look at this. But supply and demand, the goal, however, is that we meet an equal point, right? And that's called the point of equilibrium. And this is when all parties are satisfied. So when we have the perfect amount of goods supplied and the perfect amount of people demanding that. So there's no shortage or surplus available. So you're probably thinking, Mr. Ramstead, what's a shortage and what's a surplus? Well, a shortage is when there's not enough supply to meet the demand for a good or service. So that's basically the toilet paper case study that we had previously, right? So we don't have enough toilet paper to produce and make everybody happy and paying at a price that everyone's satisfied with. On the flip side, however, surplus is the exact opposite. This is when there's too much supply or not enough demand for a good or service. And unfortunately, an example of this is the dairy industry right now. There's a lot of excess milk in the market, and we'll talk a lot about that in class, in our classroom discussions and activities. But just know the difference between shortage and surplus. Shortage means there's not enough. Surplus means there's too much. Okay, so take a look at this graph here, this chart here. This is called a supply and demand schedule. So this is taken directly from that chocolate bars graph that we looked at a little bit earlier and that we've been seeing in the examples. There's the perfect point. I'm going to have you just use your best judgment right here and take a guess at what that perfect point would be, where demand and supply are satisfied. Okay? If you guessed $1.20, you'd be correct. At that point, there are exactly 300 chocolate bars demanded by people like you and me, and we are supplying exactly 300 as a business. Okay? So ideally, we would want to reach that $1.20 mark because then all parties are satisfied. We don't have a shortage where people are fighting to get the chocolate bars, and we're not left hanging with a bunch of leftover chocolate bars that are being sold for dirt cheap because they want to get them out of the store. So again, the point of equilibrium is when all supply and demand points are equal and all parties are satisfied. Do you think that the market is likely to stay in equilibrium for an extended amount of time? If you guess no, that would be correct because honestly, it's kind of a lucky shot with market research sometimes. And if we have reached that point of equilibrium, we've struck gold, that's awesome. And I think before COVID-19, we had that point of equilibrium for toilet paper, but then unfortunately the markets went crazy and we were not at equilibrium very long during the pandemic for toilet paper, that's for sure. So we see here the supply and demand for chocolate bars, that supply and demand schedule that we had in the previous slide, the supply to the sky line, the demand to the dumps line, they intersect right here. That point where they cross is the equilibrium. Okay, so to learn a little bit more about equilibrium, I'm going to have you go ahead and go to z.umn.edu/equilibrium for some additional practice.